This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand, and it is another blockbuster global episode of the show for you. It is World War III, but not quite, but maybe all over again. Has Donald Trump saved the planet from one of the three World War IIIs that we could possibly be facing? Well, we're going to be speaking to our Ukraine expert to find out whether or not we are on the verge of a nuclear apocalypse, or if Donald Trump has in fact saved the day. Plus, could you be deported for being anti-Semitic? Should you be deported for being anti-Semitic? Could being anti-Semitic actually ban you from getting Australian citizenship? Well, that is what is on the table under a new proposal from Peter Dutton and the Coalition. And I've got to say, I think this raises more questions than it answers, but I'll go through that very shortly as well. And would you pay $1 million for a study on decolonising breastfeeding? Some people would say you'd have to be a real sucker to do that. But guess who has? The Australian government. All that and more coming up. First up this week, it is the gift that keeps on giving, even though I'm not quite sure what that gift is. And this is the proposal by Peter Dutton and the Coalition to have a test for Australian citizenship that includes whether or not you're anti-Semitic, along with a possible referendum on whether or not citizens should be able to be deported by the Parliament if they hold certain bad views or do certain bad things. But that referendum may not happen. That's just possible. But the proposal to have an anti-Semitism test for the citizenship test is definitely on the table, apparently. Did everyone get that? Fantastic. This is the story that appeared on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald this week. Migrants applying for Australian passports under a coalition government will be quizzed about their attitudes towards Jewish people as part of opposition leader Peter Dutton's citizenship crackdown that includes a possible deportation referendum. Now, there is just so much to unpack in that sentence alone. Firstly, the deportation referendum, which may or may not be happening. Two different senior coalition figures seem to be saying two different things about it. One says, oh, yes, yeah, we could do that. And the other one says, oh, no, there's absolutely no plans to do that whatsoever. It follows Italy having a referendum on whether or not you have to wait 5 or 10 years before applying for citizenship in that country. In this case, it would probably look more like whether or not dual citizenship holders could be deported, because you have to have a second citizenship. You can't sort of deport someone to oblivion. You can't leave them stateless, can't deport them to nowhere. So a dual citizenship holder who had, Australian citizenship plus maybe citizenship of, a Muslim country or a majority Muslim country, if they held anti-Semitic views or were deemed to be unacceptable, of bad character or whatever, you could deport them back to that other country where they could live happily ever after, but not in Australia. Very on brand for the coalition, but also possibly not happening and possibly just a thought bubble that somebody came up with. Then we see the more concrete proposal that has actually been put forward, which has been clearly dropped deliberately to the Sydney Morning Herald. I'm going to explain a bit about that very shortly as well. And indeed, The Age for our Melbourne listeners, its sister paper. Don't want to be too Sydney-centric. I know that the People's Republic of Victoria does in fact exist, despite all the border closures. It's like Pyongyang. If you can get in there, it's great. Anyway, so this is so there's all this sort of confusion over whether or not anyone's going to be deported. There are big concerns over whether Parliament should have the authority to effectively override the courts and make a decision on deportation. Currently, the courts have to do that. Should the Parliament be able to do it, or the government be able to do that? That is a question that has, needless to say, alarmed a few legal experts. But that, we don't even know whether that's happening or not. That seems to be just a thought bubble. And indeed, that has prompted many in the Labor Party to say this just shows the coalition doesn't really know what it's talking about. It is running around trying to sort of grasp at stuff. It doesn't have a sort of coherent, cohesive plan for government. And indeed, I've speaking to a close friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine who works in the media. He said, you know what? I'm already in. The Libs just need to stop talking about the Jews. Just stop talking about the Jews. I'm voting for them. I'm Jewish. We're all in. But just shut up about it. But it seems to be something they think, all right, we're on a winner if we just keep banging this drum. But let's have a look at idea of applying for a passport, applying for citizenship, and having to have a test about your attitudes towards Jewish people. Now, if you are applying for Australian citizenship, chances are you're already a resident here. Chances are you're already living here, or at the very least, extremely familiar with Australia and Australians. You probably have family here and Australian culture. I'm just not sure how having a test about whether you're anti-Semitic or not, I'm just not sure how effective that would be. Like, even if you were anti-Semitic, I'm pretty sure you would be smart enough to know what questions you were supposed to answer and how. And I'm pretty sure that if you did have, your husband or wife here, or your family here, maybe your son or daughter, and you're coming over from the old country, say, hey, you see question 17 where it says, do you hate Jews? Answer no. Like with that, like, welcome to Australia. Question 1, what is Donald Bradman's batting average? Okay, question 2, do you think that Israel should be wiped from the face of the planet? Hint, no. Or is it multiple choice? Yes, maybe. C, yes, as long as Benjamin Netanyahu's in charge. D, all of the above. Like, I just don't understand what the actual practical purpose of or benefit of that test would be. I mean, you already got books telling you how to game NAPLAN. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't take too long before people say, this is what you answer. Just say you love everybody, all right? The other interesting thing, of course, is the fact that the Coalition decided to drop this story to the Sydney Morning Herald and presumably The Age as well, which is, these are the sort of more upmarket mastheads in Australia. They target a sort of more inner city, affluent readership base, very sophisticated, very tertiary educated, and it's fair to say far less pro-Israel than the masthead that I work for, the Daily Telegraph or the News Corp, tabloid mastheads around the country, and indeed the Australian newspaper. And so you kind of got to ask yourself, these are the sort of readers and the sort of newsrooms that generally sort of look down their nose at Peter Dutton and say, oh, he's just banging the drum, he's blowing the dog whistle, he's a race or whatever. I mean, this is, a Liberal once called the Sydney Morning Herald the paper that is read by our friends and written by our enemies. And he's not wrong. And this is the thing. It does a good job, generally speaking. It's very lifestyle wanky sort of driven. There's a lot of fancy lunches with cultural figures or whatever. It tries to sort of steer a course down the middle. It's not as bad as the Guardian. But again, you would think that if you were going to do something as kind of, and good on him. If it works in the election, that's fantastic. But it's sort of shamelessly kind of like, we're going to be even more pro-Jewish, more anti-Semitic, more pro-Israel than we've ever been before by introducing this citizenship test. Rah, 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 go Team Australia. Look how many Australian flags I've got behind me. Booyah. The last place you would plant a story like that, you would think, would be the oh-so-sophisticated almond latte set that read the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Except, where do these newspapers sell the most copies? Well, of course, they sell them in the inner city with all the granola crunching hippies, but they also sell them in the affluent suburbs of Sydney, including the eastern suburbs that has probably the highest Jewish population in Australia, and the inner southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, which have also the highest Jewish populations in Melbourne. And so clearly the Coalition is talking directly to the Jewish community. It wants to get this message directly out to those affluent suburbs with the highest Jewish populations, so that the Jewish people, the Jewish community of Australia, know that the Coalition 110% has their back. They are even more pro-Jewish than you thought they were. And they were already very pro-Jewish. And that's great. That's fine. So am I. Except they're already voting for you, mate. You've already got that vote. I mean, again, a friend of mine said that his local synagogue, big synagogue in the east with, very liberal, pro-voice and all that. Peter Dutton went to visit, standing ovation. So you've already got that cohort. And now you're just trying to get them even more. I know we used to say in the Labor Party, vote early, vote often, but, all the squares kind of started clamping down on that. Now you can only vote once. So it doesn't matter how enthusiastically you vote. You can only vote once. And those votes are already coming the coalition's way. So it just seems a bit passing strange that you would put this sort of proposal out there when it's clearly just there to send a signal of support and solidarity with the Jewish community, when that is already something you have. And the other thing, of course, is that with this and the potential, deportation referendum and whatever it might be, someone, flew tax cuts up the flagpole. I think Angus Taylor said, oh, yeah, we might have some tax cuts. Oh, we might. No, we don't know, Will they or won't they? We're just going to say, hey, vote for us. We might give you some tax cuts. We might have a referendum on deportation. And this has given a bit of heart to people in the Labor Party. And have a look out for this. I'm not sure if it will end up being you, but I'm told that the new line that is going to come out from the Labor Party and or at least some members is that basically Peter Dutton is doing a Forrest Gump. Because Forrest Gump famously said, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know which one you're going to get. I said, are you sure that he's not talking about the coalition policies? And of course, at the same time as all of this is happening, as I revealed to you on this very podcast, the Libs, Peter Dutton's own party, is doing deals, having talks about doing a preference deal with the Muslim vote. So at the same time it's saying, I'm all in with Israel, all in with the Jewish community in Australia, it is doing a deal with a movement running candidates, which is basically there to punish the Labor Party, punish the government, punish anyone for not being pro-Palestine enough. And these guys are doing deals. I'm told, further to what I already revealed, which that senior Liberal figures were in talks with the candidate in Tony Burke's seat of Watson, and they are both planning to put Labor last, which means that Burke might actually lose his seat, and there could be a similar result in Werriwa, depending on how the cards fall. But I'm told also that a senior Liberal figure in the area has been walking the Muslim vote candidate around, even taking him to his Maronite church in the electorate and introducing him to all the Christians there and saying, hey, this guy's a great bloke, he's fantastic. Maybe he is a great bloke, I'm sure he is, whatever. But again, the Libs are doing this while at the same time they're going to make it conditional in the citizenship test that you show that you're not anti-Semitic. And now to another absolute cracker of a yarn that emerged this week. This is a timeless classic. It is like a fine wine that gets better with age. And it comes around about every year. And it's a list of all the absolute nutbag, crazy, unhinged research projects that academics with little pet projects apply for. They apply for government money for all different departments and agencies. And invariably, the government just hands over money to some of the nuttiest, craziest, just loopiest. Just you would think it was satire, and if you think I'm exaggerating, just wait. And of course, firstly, this is part of a swathe of grants for other really good stuff and practical stuff that benefits it. But these ones always sneak through the net, and the figures are just eye-watering. And I'll read you a couple of them. Again, you think I'm exaggerating, you think it's satire. Wait for this. Researchers have been given $1 million, a bit over $1 million, in fact, $1.07 million from memory, for a project on, quote, unquote, decolonizing breastfeeding. Yes, who knew? Breastfeeding has been colonized. It is a program to promote, quote, lactation care to support the initiation and maintenance of breastfeeding among First Nations women. How is that decolonizing? I mean, how were they doing it before colonization? I'm pretty sure they were doing it the same the same way. And just, again, of course, we want to encourage people to breastfeed, whatever the colour of their skin or their background. It's meant to be the healthiest way to do it. Although if you can't, ladies, don't stress. You'll be right. It's okay. But no, we have to decolonise it and get $1 million for that. I would have probably just called it something else, just between you and me. But anyway, did you know, by the way, it's not just breastfeeding that's racist, or maybe not breastfeeding that's racist. I'm not sure. It's dentistry. Therefore, never fear. I know this is a shock to a lot of you, but don't worry, they're onto it, because there is a $900,000 grant that is being delivered to a project for anti-racist dentistry at the University of Adelaide. This program, quote, aims to develop and evaluate an anti-racism curriculum for dental students, enhance the recruitment and wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander dentists, and create an oral promotion training model for Aboriginal health workers. Now, all of this sounds kind of pretty good. The last bit sounds pretty good. Anti-racism dentistry. Is it because all teeth are white? I mean, not mine after a couple of nights out, I've got to tell you. But anyway, just why? Why would you do this? Oh, there's a $997,825 program to elevate the queer professional identity in primary healthcare. That's thanks to the University of Queensland. There is also there's a bargain basement here one, just $18,480 for a drag show contest for scientists. Again, I love drag. That's fantastic. I love a drag show. But do it at the Albury. Do it at ARC. Are they even still around these days? Somewhere in Oxford Street. Do it at Taylor Square. Like, why do it for scientists? They're meant to be curing cancer and stuff. They don't have time to do all the makeup and get their heels on. They fall over and topple a Bunsen burner. But the weird thing about or actually kind of troubling thing, I mean, it's all just amazingly funny and just great and awesome. But the problem is that people see this stuff and they go, as they should, by the way, because it's just ridiculous. But people see this stuff and they think, well, this is where all the money is going. This is the sort of stuff that our money is being spent on. They're sitting there thinking, I'm a taxpayer. My taxpayer money is going to fund these ridiculous programs that I'd never even heard of if, in the best of times, and would think were ridiculous if I just heard of them. And now I hear about them and I'm also paying for them. This sends people spare. And I had a colleague of mine on Sky News saying, this is why we need to cancel all government research grants. It's like, really? Even the ones to cure cancer? Like, of every single public funding grant should be cancelled because of these. But this is the sort of reaction that they promote. And again, as I wrote this week, if I was a secret agent working for Donald Trump, right? If someone said, Joe, we want you to take Trumpism international, make it global. It's kind of like a right-wing version of Trotskyism, which and this is the first time you'll ever have heard this word ever, which I have dubbed Trumpskyism. We're taking it global. And people want to do this. You've got Nigel Farage in the UK. You've got the crazy sort of quasi, almost not quite, maybe overhangs of neo-Nazism in Germany, the AfD movement, pretty creepy. You've got the Marine Le Pen's movement in France. I mean, it is not exactly a secret that populist far-right forces are on the move. And when the left does stuff like that, you are doing their job for them. If I was working for one of these populist far-right firms, this is exactly what I'd do. I would pretend that I was studying decolonising dentistry and then ask the government for $1 million and then just wait for them to give it to me. And then people would read it and go, this is bonkers. This is what the government's spending money on. Well, the government must be nuts. The government has to go. And this is what universities are having their research departments, their students, their academics spend all their time and energy on? Well, these universities, they're woke. They've got to go. And if you think I'm exaggerating, guess what? That's exactly what the coalition is doing. They're saying that they're going to set up a Doge-style, remember that, Elon Musk's little efficiency outfit? Going to set up a Doge-style outfit that's going to put an end to all this kind of waste. So they're already starting to talk like Trump, employ Trump terminology in order to combat this and tap into popular support for doing this. And, Donald Trump comes and says, we're going to drain the swamp. The opposition finance spokesman, Jane Hume, spokeswoman, Jane Hume, lovely lady, by the way, she's saying, we're going to end the rot. So we're going to have a Doge-style thing that's going to drain the swamp and end the rot because of this crazy, dumb stuff that these nutbag academic activists are applying for. And some nutbag, nameless, faceless bureaucrat is rubber stamping. And you wonder why populist far-right politics takes off. It's when the lunar left does dumb stuff like this. If you just say, we're going to have decent healthcare, we're going to pay our cops better, we're going to have decent education and pay our teachers a proper wage, no one can argue with that. But you start doing decolonising breastfeeding, you start doing anti-racist dentistry, and people think, you know what? Maybe the other lot aren't that crazy, because you sound pretty crazy too. Well, it is one of 3 World War IIIs that could be about to break out across the planet. It is, of course, Russia's egregious, evil and wholly illegal invasion of Ukraine. It has been dragging on for years now. The carnage has been absolutely unthinkable. And yet, Donald Trump reckons he can save us all. He reckons he can tell Vladimir Putin to stop, and he'll stop. And they laughed at him. Ho, 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 they said. And yet, that appears to be what's kind of happened, except maybe it hasn't. But Donald Trump has had a talk with Vladimir Putin, and Russia has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire of sorts. Or has it? Well, obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about, as you would have just heard from that. So we've brought in our resident Ukraine expert, my very good mate, Misha Zelinsky, who was a correspondent in the Ukraine. He's written a book about his experiences there, and he joins me on The Real Story. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good to be with you, Joe.
Absolute pleasure to have you. This is, to give the background just quickly, as you know, and as our listeners might just want a bit of a refresher on, but there were preliminary talks between the Russians and the Americans that did not involve Ukraine. The rest of the world, not least of all Ukraine, said, hang on a minute, how can you negotiate a ceasefire or a peace when we're not even at the table? Ukraine had previously been saying it wanted a 30-day ceasefire. It now appears, after the 2 presidents, Putin and Trump, have spoken, and again, Zelensky doesn't appear to be in these conversations. He did have one with Donald Trump, didn't end well. It appears that Putin has now agreed to this ceasefire of sorts.
Well, look, here's what Donald Trump came away from his 2-hour conversation with Vladimir Putin yesterday. This is what we understand, is that he came away with an agreement from Vladimir Putin to stop committing some of his war crimes.
Yes.
So he'll continue to commit the other war crimes.
Yep.
And an agreement to play an ice hockey match between Russia and the United States. So it's
they can get pretty violent.
Right. So if I look a little bit underwhelmed, Joe, in terms of...
You thought Ukraine was bad.
Right. So, no, and we're being flippant about it, but the truth of the matter is, to unpack that a bit, what Putin has agreed to is to temporarily, for 30 days, stop bombing Ukrainian infrastructure. Now,
that's right. Energy sites in particular.
Right. International law says that if you deliberately target civilian infrastructure that's required to essentially keep people alive, which energy infrastructure in a cold place like Ukraine is absolutely falls into that category, it's a war crime. Yep. So Putin's been doing that for years. Yep. I've seen that firsthand, seen the bombing of these facilities and the real scary and awful detrimental impacts on those that live there. And so he's agreed to stop doing that for 30 days. Everything else, his status quo. And his demands remain as egregious as they ever were, which is the total capitulation of Ukraine. So to the extent that Donald Trump's come away with any sort of peace, it's a complete furphy.
And as you say, the ceasefire only applied to energy infrastructure. It did not necessarily apply to, or didn't apply to hostilities, didn't apply to what was happening on the water, although they have agreed to sort of
they're going to
keep
talking about
that.
That's
right, talking about that. But even the supposed ceasefire on energy infrastructure, there are reports, as we're talking late on Wednesday, that already Russia had breached this and there'd been another strike.
Particularly after Donald Trump took away Ukraine's ability to see US intelligence. So the US was providing a lot of intelligence to the Ukrainians, which was allowing them to defend themselves from Russian strikes on their infrastructure. So as soon as effectively Ukraine went blind, Russia ramped up its attacks. It had these biggest drone attacks and strikes over the last couple of weeks, including right up until this ceasefire, and perhaps right up and past it, has been attacking the infrastructure of Ukraine relentlessly, bombing it into submission. And so, again, Vladimir Putin is a war criminal.
Yeah.
Taking war criminals at their word is a stretch at best. But the thing we always know about Putin is he always breaks any deal he makes.
That's
a little
right.
bit like Donald Trump. The fact is, we'll wait and see. It's 30 days. It's not a great agreement. Perhaps it's the start of something more, but we got to be skeptical when dealing with Vladimir Putin. I agree with Boris Johnson, who said recently that Vladimir Putin's laughing at us. And, the royal we, collectively, we need to muscle up to him.
Well, speaking of the laughing at us or playing us for fools, as you said, when Ukraine goes blind, Russia knows that's when it's most vulnerable. That's when Russia strikes. And one of the conditions that Russia wants to put on Ukraine, if there's to be any further ceasefire, is that Ukraine ceases to receive any intelligence from any third parties, from any allies, and ceases to receive any military support from them,
right.
Which, of course, would make them a sitting duck if they agreed to that. Russia
well, you
could
think
just
about
come
it,
in and knock
right?
them over with
Let's
a
just
feather.
play it out. So Vladimir Putin, in the last 10 years, has invaded Ukraine twice. Mm-hmm. And so the price of peace, according to Vladimir Putin, is to say, okay, I'd like to keep what I've got, which is 15% of Ukraine's sovereign landmass. And in exchange, Ukraine gets no intelligence to see what we're doing, no weapons to defend itself in the future. And I promise I'll never do it again.
Yep.
It doesn't sound like a great peace for Ukrainians, but I actually think has far bigger ramifications for all nations, including Australia. Fundamentally, this is a pivot point for the world. If Putin gets away with this invasion, he's able to essentially take away Ukraine's sovereignty now and into the future, can invade the rest of it later on without any sort of protection for Ukraine. That has extraordinarily dangerous implications for everybody. And other dictators are watching. They're taking notes and they're making plans.
And obviously what you're talking about there is China looking at that and saying, right, well, if the world just kind of goes meh and a bit of token support, bit of material support, but no boots on the ground, lets Putin take away a big chunk on the east of Ukraine. China has a look at that and says, right, all right, well, we might do the same thing with Taiwan.
Right.
If we know that's not going to happen. And again, it like
but
you say,
also
it's
North Korea, also Iran. They've all got territorial ambitions in their region. China has the most probably forward-leaning ambitions in the area. It wants to be the hegemon in East Asia. But Russia also has its eyes on more than just Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is on the record.
Wants to get it all back.
Well, he's on the record as saying the single biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century is the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not World War I, not World War II. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the most oppressive regime in human history.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. And so we're looking at, I suppose, if you like, a dress rehearsal for what could happen elsewhere. Yeah. So if people think it's just about, Vladimir Zelensky just gives back, Donbass, everything's fine. We can all just go back to sleeping at night. It will actually be, give an inch to a dictator, they take
the lesson of Putin is that bad behaviour, unresisted, becomes worse behaviour. You look at his history over 20 years. He invaded Georgia in 2008.
Yeah.
He invaded Ukraine in first time in 2014. He meddled in the US election in 2016. He meddled in Brexit in 2016. He then invades Ukraine in 2022. All the nice words in the world to say, please don't do that, sir, and sternly worded letters do not appear to be deterring him from behaving the way that he is. Unfortunately, bad behaviour has got to be resisted, and it's uncomfortable. I get it. Once you start to engage with the reality of that, it demands certain behaviours of you, and it is uncomfortable. But if we don't resist this bad behaviour, Putin is not going to stop. So what does peace look like? Look, does it look like Ukraine getting all its land back? It should. Yeah, but at a minimum, whatever peace Ukraine gets, it must be a secure, sovereign and lasting peace. And that means they need to have security guarantees, whether that's in NATO, whether it's a peacekeeping force of Europeans and other like-minded nations having troops on the ground inside Ukraine. The dividend of this has to be a Western, democratic, European, sovereign and free Ukraine secure within its own borders now and into the future.
So just looking at the prospect of how that might happen, obviously it can't happen without US support, I wouldn't have thought. Ukraine has now said after that snafu at the White House, look, we'll sign the minerals deal, we'll do whatever you want. If Putin looks like he's playing Trump for a fool, and if Putin, breaches the deal that Trump thinks he has with him, is there a chance that Trump could sort of pivot and turn off Putin? And how would he'd have to do it? There'd have to be some sort of face-saving exercise that Trump was able to do and say, either he just pretends it's peace and says, look, I promised you peace, my peace I give you. And Ukraine says, yeah, but we're half the size and we don't have any support, blah, blah, blah. But Donald Trump says, I got your peace. that's it done? Or is there a way that Trump could pivot and say, we had a deal with Russia. Russia broke it. They're the bad guys. We're now going to make them pay. Because he did say, he was talking tough to Russia in the lead up to this phone call, saying, if you do not agree to this ceasefire, which Russia was refusing to do, you're in big trouble. Is there a chance for Ukraine to win America back on side under Donald Trump?
I mean, maybe. Look, I think the Ukrainians made a big step forward after that shocking meeting in the White House where not just Donald Trump, but J.D. Vance, for whatever reason, was there berating him as well, berating Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House, in the Oval Office, which was shocking. Since then, they managed to get the United States back on side. The United States started resharing intelligence, military intelligence, and providing military support, and also providing the impetus for a 30-day ceasefire, which of course has not yet happened. So Trump's completely unpredictable. The one thing that is predictable about Trump, though, is he'll say he'll get frustrated. He might then say to Putin and Russia, "We're going to put sanctions on you," etc. But what he always does is he talks it up, and then he immediately cuts bad deals. And so the art of the deal, actually, most of the time is a very bad deal. Yep. And so what I would fear in any situation, Trump loves the deal.
Yeah, that's right.
Less than the terms of it.
Deal or a bad deal,
and so from the Ukrainian point of view, the longer it goes on, there is a chance that this all backflips onto Putin and he's left looking like the bad guy that he is. But I would fear that Putin knows that Trump wants peace almost at any price. And if you want peace at almost at any price, then that puts you in a pretty strong bargaining position. He has a fascination with Putin's sort of strongman persona. Yep. And I would fear that, Putin signs a document, says, I won't invade again. That's good enough for me, says Trump. And then he goes off with about his business. And of course, Putin has just turned a strategic defeat into strategic victory, and he rearms and retools himself for maybe not to the too distant future.
And Trump gets to say peace in our time.
Well, that's
right. It says right here on the paper,
right.
I built the wall, I got your peace.
Yeah. And that's why
anyone else's fake news.
And that's why I think it needs to have real material security guarantees that are more than just a signed piece of paper. I mean, when the Ukrainians talk about this, going right back in history, they actually had the world's biggest nuclear arsenal.
I know, and they gave
post-Soviet Union breakup, and they gave it away in 1994 for security guarantees of their sovereign territory.
Outside US and Russia, of course,
right.
The third largest in the world.
Right, and so, of course, they have not had that honoured.
Right. Never put your gun down first. Right. I've watched enough action movies to know.
And so you can understand the skepticism.
Yeah.
And so I think what looks like real and lasting security guarantees is what the Europeans are talking about, what Macron's talking about, what the United Kingdom is talking about, what the Germans are talking about. They've just announced a massive retooling of their military. It's boots on the ground. It's what Australia's talking about, being part of that coordinated effort by like-minded nations. I think they're calling it a coalition of the willing. They might consider rebranding. They might consider rebranding it. It's
strange sense of deja vu.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
Sounds good.
Not led by the United States on this occasion, but nevertheless, I think security of that nature is going to be critical. Words won't be enough. Signed pieces of paper with the signature of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will not be enough. But I think we need material, real sovereign guarantees. And you get those. Look, I think at that point, peace does start to look a lot better. If it doesn't have those guarantees, it will be a bad peace. It will with a much darker, worse outcome. You mentioned World War III at the beginning. That is what the sort of beginning of a major global conflict, I believe, could look like.
There you go, folks. You heard it here first. World War III, still coming. Misha Zelensky, always great to chat to you, mate. Thanks for those fantastic insights.
Good to be with you, mate, as depressing as it is.
And that is all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for your company. I hope you've had as much fun and as high blood pressure as I have. If you want to get in touch with us, just flick us an email, therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au. I'm still locked out of my Instagram account, as I am out of my Facebook account, and I have resolved never to post on my Twitter account. So that's me done for social media, but you can still get a hold of me via the emails, the electronic letters, or you can simply read my columns in the Daily and Saturday Telegraphs or various mastheads around the country every Monday and Saturday, and you can leave a comment there. And I promise that I will dive in and read them and agree with absolutely everything you say. Speaking of which, you can leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you get your podcasts on. Remember, only 5-star ratings are accepted. It's a peculiar quirk little glitch in the system. So just leave 5 stars. Try to do anything else, it just won't work. So do all that, and I will see you and hear you next week.